and the Morales Memorial Foundation. Each of these partners played a pivotal role, from sharing the survey with their constituents to reaching out to their networks to convene Latino multi-sector leaders to share their feedback back in May. I also want to acknowledge and thank the different organizations that are with us this afternoon who are going to join us in the breakout rooms. We have different representatives from Ben Melson in the Greater Houston Partnership, Marcy Mir from El Centro de Corazon, Elliot Whitney from Good Reason Houston, and Bo Fraga from Baker Ripley, who are going to have a conversation with us about some of the data that we'll share this afternoon. And there'll be a great opportunity to ask questions, given that each of them are leading important work in some of these respective. So again, if you're just joining us, just make sure that you're going on mute. And then in the breakout rooms, we'll have an opportunity to share reactions. So our goals today is to, one, share our insights from our convening in surveying over 400 Latino educators, multi-sector leaders, and Spanish-speaking parents in Houston about how COVID-19 is uniquely impacting Latino children and families in the greater Houston region. And then secondly, to get your perspective on the data, including the solutions that we should be elevating during this time as we continue to strengthen our advocacy efforts. We believe that we can improve education by equipping more Latino leaders to be at the forefront of education change. Quite simply, we believe representation matters, and the solutions that we generate in the education sector can be even stronger if we incorporate the Latino experience. This is the spirit that guides all of our work, including the report that we've put together this afternoon. Our mission is to develop, place, and connect essential Latino leaders in the education sector. And this is why we do the work that we do. Across Greater Houston, 50% of the students are Latino, yet only 2% of the leaders that serve on the boards of education organizations are Latino, and only 8% of senior education leaders are Latino. These are the leadership gaps that we seek to close and why we exist. We know from doing this work and from our own experience that the Latino population is often underrepresented in leadership positions. We know that our voice is often overlooked in the decision-making process, and we have a rich perspective to share that can benefit our entire community. This is why one of our goals during this crisis has been to elevate the Latino voice, especially of those Spanish-speaking Latino low-income families in Houston, to ensure that our perspective is at the forefront of the decision-making process in the education sector. So how is COVID-19 impacting the Latino students and families, and how do we go about gathering this feedback from Latinos across Houston? There are 3 stakeholder groups that we convened and are surveyed. One of them is Latino Spanish-speaking parents. This is a group of stakeholders, over 300, that we specifically got their feedback by sharing a survey with them. Secondly, we also convened and surveyed 53 teachers, principals, and nonprofit leaders. And lastly, we convened as well 60 multi-sector leaders from across 45 organizations serving the Houston community. Many of you who attended that meeting in May are present this afternoon. In speaking with all 3 groups, there are 5 key themes that emerged. 1 is student mental health. 2 is access to basic resources. 3 is student learning loss. 4 is student access to technology. And 5 is the need for long-term advocacy planning with the Latino voice. So throughout this presentation over the next couple minutes, I'm gonna go over each of the themes and what the stakeholder groups shared. I'm specifically going to start and highlight the voices of Latino Spanish-speaking parents. We think this is especially important because this is often the group that is overlooked in all of these conversations, yet is a group that has the majority of the children across our school systems across Greater Houston. So who are these 318 Spanish-speaking Latino parents and guardians? The majority of the parents and guardians that answered the survey were female. There are a distribution across all the different age groups that you can see of the parents. Most of the parents were between the ages of 35 to 44. And we received responses from over 101, or from 101 zip codes across the greater Houston region. All of these parents have children that are across a wide range of ages, from toddlers and infants less than 4 to children who are preparing to go to college or are in college already, to obviously everything in between. And we specifically, in this survey, we asked 4 open-ended questions. The reason that we did that is because we wanted to see what was on parents' minds during this time. So the first open-ended question that we asked is, how has COVID-19 impacted your children? And you can see in the pie graph, the percentage of responses that fall under one of these 6 categories. We actually read through all 318 responses. And of those 318 responses, 46% wrote stories, anecdotes that relate to the decline, to parents saying that there's a decline or deterioration of mental health of their children during this time. They often use words to describe their children right now as being anxious, depressed, bored, and afraid to go outside, afraid to interact with the world. There was one anecdote specifically that I remember from reading all of the survey responses, where a parent shared that because several of the family members had contracted COVID-19, her child is now constantly scared that he's going to get COVID-19 and constantly keeps asking to be taken to the hospital. Another parent shared that her children are afraid to go to the park, to engage in any activities outdoor. And this was a very common type of anecdote that 46% of parents shared. This finding affirms some of what many of us are experiencing, seeing in our own households and in our communities, and what we imagine might be true, but we were a little bit surprised that it was so prominently featured, this response to this question, because as we may know, mental health is often taboo in the Latino culture. And so for nearly half of the parents to write stories and responses regarding their children's mental health during this time, I think just highlights what an alarming situation many of our parents are facing when it comes to their children. The next top response with 27% was loss of socialization. It was actually a phrase that many of our parents wrote out, that they were concerned about their children during their time, and particularly the social skills that they feel they're losing because of the situation. These are some of the quotes that I mentioned that you'll find in the presentation. Secondly, when we asked the parents, the second open-ended question is, how has COVID-19 impacted your children's education? Specifically, when it comes to education, 41% of the parents wrote that they're very concerned about the learning loss that their children are incurring during this time. To put this in perspective, by the time most of our students return to school, either virtually or in person across the greater Houston region, they will have been out of school physically for 180 days. That's an entire school year. And the research shows that just missing 10% of the school year is detrimental and predictive of future setbacks. Our parents know this as well. They're seeing this and they're very concerned. Specifically, when it comes to the quality of virtual learning, many of our parents wrote that they're concerned about whether their children who may speak Spanish at home, who may be an English language learner, is really getting the resources and the access to the learning, the quality of learning that they need to be successful during this time. One quote, for instance, from one of the parents said, they understood almost nothing with the online classes. And the worst thing is that it's in English and I can help them, and they don't know it very well. We find, as you'll see in the rest of the presentation, that parents are really eager to help their children during this time and make the best out of virtual learning, but the language barrier is something that is holding them from helping their children on that front. I mentioned the loss of socialization. The third question that we ask parents is, what are the top 3 concerns that you have about your family as a result of COVID-19? And half of the parents wrote a response that relates in some way to income insecurity. They've either lost their job or don't have money to pay their bills and to be able to fulfill their basic needs during this time. The second most popular response was food insecurity. Many of our families and our children are going hungry during this time. I know it's many of us have seen this in the news, but it was very concerning to obviously see so many families facing such a combination of different issues that are not isolated in themselves. And so very simply, one parent wrote, "We lack food here at home and we need a job." And as I mentioned, these issues are not isolated in themselves. They intersect with education, they intersect with housing, they intersect with food insecurity. For instance, one family or one parent wrote, "My son is missing a computer since I don't have one. I also don't have a tablet that he can use, and I can't purchase one since I do not have a job." So what this highlights for us is that in order for us to really tackle this moment and improve the quality of education, many of these issues have to be tackled at the same time in the various systems that are providing support for our children. The last open-ended question that we ask parents is, what resources do you need to help your children, help your child's education during COVID-19? The top 2 responses, 39% of parents wrote that they need more access to technology, specifically a computer or a device, and to internet access in order to help their children during this time. I know we've seen a lot of stories about the digital divide, which is one of the breakout rooms we're going to be focused on. And the second response is educational resources. So many of our parents are still lost about where exactly they can go online to figure out what activities they can engage in to help their children learn during this time. I've practiced this several times. I've gone on Google and I've searched for resources in Spanish in Houston, and it's still a very complicated process for parents. So I think this is an opportunity for different systems or organizations to be able to collaborate to deliver this message more effectively to Spanish-speaking families specifically. When it comes to digital divide, it's been very interesting to see the United States Census Bureau actually survey families across the United States about a whole wide range of issues since the beginning of the pandemic. This information is public and we thought it would be interesting to share with you. Among the top 10 states in the country with the highest Latino populations, the table on the left-hand side shows you what percent of Latinos, nearly 3 million in the state of Texas, for instance, what percent of Latinos per each of the state indicate that there is a device that is always available for educational services. So if we're looking at the left-hand table first, we see that 58% of Latinos in California indicate they have a device always available for educational services. Texas is at number 7, well below the US average for Latinos, indicating that response at 51%. So we thought this would be an interesting data point to further illustrate what parents indicated is a need. If you look at the right-hand side, in terms of the percent of Latinos indicating that internet is always available for educational resources among the top 10 states with the highest Latino populations, Texas ranks as number 4. Latinos in Texas rank as number 4, is indicating that response. Again, this quote from one of our parents underscores what I just mentioned in terms that they want guidance on how to help their children in their school routine. We also interviewed, as I mentioned, Latino teachers, principals, and nonprofit leaders across Houston. And of 137 responses that we received on the question, how is COVID-19 uniquely challenging Latino students and families, the top responses as well centered on lack of internet access, lack of computer access, and income insecurity. Obviously, for the Latino teachers and the educators that are in the front line serving our students, the internet access and computer access is at the forefront, given that they're experiencing on a daily basis the challenge of connecting with many of our students. And lastly, we also interviewed and convened 60 Latino multi-sector leaders from 45 organizations. In our full report that you can access online, you can see some of the quotes highlighted from some of these leaders. But basically, a lot of the feedback that we collected from them reinforced, surfaced and reinforced these five themes as well. So with that, we're going to move to the next